As the president visits with families of the victims of the Oregon shooting, Senate Democrats have unveiled plans for sweeping gun control measures.
But as the firearm debate continues across the country, what myths are being used to push this agenda?
Well, here to break them down, Fox News contributor and the host of the Outdoor Channel documentary Safe Haven, which takes a critical look at gun-free zones in America. Katie Pavlich joins us. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. Well, first up, you say the gun show loophole is actually a myth.
Huge myth. So you've heard politicians like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and others who support their gun control measures say that we have to close the gun show loophole. Well, the problem is that the gun show loophole simply doesn't exist. The same federal firearms laws that apply outside of gun shows also apply inside of gun shows. But despite that fact, we keep hearing that we need to close a loophole that simply doesn't exist.
All right, myth number 2, you say buying a gun is as easy as buying groceries. We was there, you can walk right into Walmart and buy a gun.
Right. President Obama has said it's harder to buy a vegetable than it is to buy a firearm. But last time I checked, you don't have to show identification, government identification, photo identification to buy a firearm. You don't have to fill out paperwork or to buy a vegetable in groceries, excuse me. And you don't have to fill out paperwork or go through a background check to buy groceries. So they are wrong on that point as well.
I wish they would make me go through some of that while I'm trying to buy cookies or ice cream or something.
Right? That would be great.
How about
Make it harder.
How about this one? Another myth you say is that gun violence is skyrocketing. You've got some numbers that show something different.
Yeah, we've seen gun control advocates and a lot of people in the media, quite frankly, perpetuating this myth that gun violence is out of control, that gun violence is on the rise, when really we've seen crimes carried out with firearms drop by 50% since 1993. So the idea that crime is on the rise and committed with firearms just isn't true.
Katie, what about the idea that gun-free zones prevent gun violence? Is that a myth?
That is a huge myth, and this is something that I've taken a critical look at with the Outdoor Channel. And you look at the statistics, all but 2 places in terms of mass shootings over the past 50 years have occurred inside of gun-free zones. And I think it's true that gun-free zones aren't necessarily gun-free, and that's where we see a lot of the violence occur in these places. So I think that we have to relook at that as well and look at the myth of gun-free zones keeping people safe.
And the 5th and final myth that we're breaking down for you, nobody's demanding gun confiscation. What do you mean?
Well, you look at the rhetoric that was used by President Obama last week after the Oregon Community College shooting, and President Obama said, well, look, we need gun owners to come to some modest agreements and do some modest proposals and back them in terms of laws that have been passed in England and Australia. But when you look at the laws that are passed in those countries, they require mass confiscation or mandated government buybacks of firearms. And they also include outright bans of handguns in those countries. So when the president and other gun control advocates say we need gun laws like Great Britain and Australia, they're really talking about confiscation and bans on those handguns.
You know, Katie, what's so unfortunate, though, is that we continuously see gun violence. Yesterday we saw, I think it was in Texas and Arizona, even more. So something needs to be done about the problem. Does mental health need to be addressed more?
I think it certainly does. And if you look at the work of the National Rifle Association and the National Shooting Sports Foundation, they've actually allocated significant resources to mental health issues and to make sure that people with mental health problems don't get their hands on firearms, because, of course, we've seen the devastating results of that. So there are things that can be done, but more gun control is certainly not one of them to solve the problem.
All right, Katie Pavlich, we appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks so much,
guys.
Katie.